The recruitment letter arrived on Vatican letterhead, but the position description was unlike anything I had ever seen. Specialized enforcement officer needed for ecclesiastical tribunal duties, exceptional compensation, absolute discretion required, must be capable of carrying out final judgments without question. I had spent 12 years as a corrections officer in Rome's maximum security prison. I thought I understood what final judgments meant in the context of criminal justice. I was completely wrong. Father Domenico met me in a basement office 3 levels below the main Vatican administrative building. The walls were lined with legal texts in multiple languages, some so old their leather bindings had cracked and faded to brown. "Marco," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his ancient wooden desk, "your experience with difficult prisoners and your psychological evaluations indicate you might be suitable for this position. However, the work is unlike anything in your background." He opened a thick manila folder and removed a single sheet of paper. "Before we proceed, you must understand that accepting this position means signing multiple confidentiality agreements. Breaking these agreements would result in immediate excommunication and criminal prosecution under Vatican law." I nodded. The salary he had mentioned over the phone was 3 times my current income. The Vatican operates a special tribunal that handles cases involving entities that fall outside normal ecclesiastical jurisdiction, Father Domenico continued. "These are not human defendants, Marco. They are beings that have violated the fundamental laws governing the spiritual realm." He slid the paper across his desk. It contained 3 rules printed in Latin, Italian, and English. Rule 1. Never look directly into the defendant's eyes during the execution process. Maintain focus on the binding apparatus at all times. Rule 2. The execution must be completed within exactly 7 minutes of the final judgment. No delays for any reason. Rule 3. After each execution, you must immediately consume the blessed wine provided. This is not optional. These rules exist because past executioners who violated them experienced severe psychological trauma or worse, Father Domenico explained. The beings you will be executing possess abilities that can affect human consciousness in dangerous ways. "What kind of beings?" I asked. "Fallen entities who have attempted to interfere with divine will, angels who have violated their sacred duties, spirits who have corrupted their assigned purposes." He paused and poured himself a glass of wine. "The divine court passes judgment on these cases, and when the sentence is final execution, that responsibility falls to you. How exactly does one execute a spiritual being?" Father Domenico walked to a cabinet and removed what looked like an ornate silver chalice connected to a complex mechanical device. "This is the apparatus of final dissolution. It was blessed by Pope Pius IX in 1854 and has been used in the divine court for over a century. The process channels concentrated holy energy through this device, causing the complete dissolution of the defendant's spiritual essence." He set the apparatus on his desk. Up close, I could see intricate engravings covering every surface, crosses, Latin inscriptions, and symbols I didn't recognize. The defendant is bound to a consecrated platform using blessed chains. You operate the apparatus while maintaining focus on these control dials. He pointed to 3 silver knobs on the device's base. The entire process takes exactly 7 minutes. No more, no less. "And if I look at them during the process?" The previous executioner looked directly at a defendant 3 years ago. He spent the following 6 months in a psychiatric facility, completely unable to speak or feed himself. Even after recovery, he could never explain what he had seen. The experience left him permanently changed. I stared at the apparatus, trying to process what I was being told. "How often does the divine court convene?" "Approximately once every 2 months, sometimes more frequently if multiple cases require resolution. You would be on call for these sessions and perform regular maintenance on the apparatus between executions." The money was substantial, but the nature of the work was unlike anything I had imagined. Can I have time to consider the offer? Of course. However, I should mention that once you accept, you cannot resign from the position. The Church considers this a lifetime appointment due to the sensitive nature of the work and the confidential information you would possess. That night I lay awake thinking about Father Domenico's offer. The idea of executing spiritual beings seemed like something from medieval manuscripts, not modern Vatican operations. But the salary would allow me to pay off my mother's medical debts and finally afford decent housing for my family. 2 days later, I returned to Father Domenico's office and accepted the position. The training process took 3 weeks. Father Domenico introduced me to the apparatus's operation, showing me how to calibrate the energy levels and maintain proper timing. I practiced on inanimate objects, learning to focus completely on the control dials while ignoring everything else in my peripheral vision. The most important aspect of this work is consistency, Father Domenico emphasized during one training session. The defendants will attempt to distract you, to make you look at them, or hesitate in operating the apparatus. Some may speak to you in voices designed to sound like family members or loved ones. Others may create visual illusions in your peripheral vision. You must ignore all of these attempts and focus only on completing the process. He also taught me about the blessed wine I was required to consume after each execution. This wine has been consecrated specifically to cleanse any spiritual contamination you might absorb during the process. The defendant's dissolution releases energy that can affect nearby humans. The wine neutralizes these effects. My first execution was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October. I arrived at the Divine Court chamber at dawn to prepare the apparatus and review the case file. The defendant was described as a guardian angel of the fourth choir who abandoned his assigned human charges to pursue personal desires in the material realm. His actions had resulted in the deaths of 3 people he was supposed to protect. The Divine Court chamber was unlike any courtroom I had ever seen. The ceilings stretched up into darkness, supported by massive stone columns carved with religious imagery. At the center of the room stood a raised platform made from what appeared to be white marble, with silver chains attached to metal rings embedded in the stone. Father Domenico entered with 2 other priests I had not met before. They positioned themselves at different points around the chamber and began chanting in Latin while I set up the apparatus on a wooden table facing the platform. At exactly 9 a.m., the defendant was brought in. I kept my eyes focused on the apparatus controls as instructed, but I could see enough in my peripheral vision to know that the being on the platform was not human. The chains binding it to the marble platform seemed to glow faintly, and I could hear what sounded like wings rustling despite seeing no visible wings. "Guardian Seraphiel," Father Domenico announced in a formal tone. "The Divine Court has found you guilty of abandoning your sacred duties and causing the deaths of those under your protection. The sentence is complete dissolution." I heard the defendant begin to speak, but the voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once. "Marco Benedetti, you have children of your own. Think about what you are doing to someone else's child." Following my training, I ignored the words and focused on the apparatus controls. Father Domenico nodded to me, indicating that I should begin the process. I turned the first dial to the prescribed setting and heard a low humming sound emanate from the device. The defendant's voice changed, becoming higher and more desperate. "Your daughter Sophia needs surgery for her heart condition. I can arrange for the finest cardiac surgeons to treat her. Just stop what you are doing and release me." My heart racing, I turned the second dial. The humming increased in volume and pitch. I had never told anyone at the Vatican about Sophia's medical condition. "Your mother is dying, Marco. Cancer is spreading through her liver. I can heal her completely if you just look at me and release these chains." I forced myself to focus on the third dial, knowing that I was halfway through the 7-minute process. The defendant's voice became multiple voices, all speaking at once. "We can give you wealth beyond imagination. Your wife will leave you when she discovers what you do here. Your son will grow up to hate you for this. Look at us, Marco. See what you are destroying." I kept my eyes locked on the control dials and watched the timer Father Domenico had placed next to the apparatus. 4 minutes remaining. The voices stopped suddenly, replaced by a sound I can only describe as cosmic wind. The air in the chamber became thick and difficult to breathe. Light began emanating from the platform, growing steadily brighter. 3 minutes remaining. The light became so intense that it was visible even with my eyes focused downward on the apparatus. The entire chamber was filled with brilliant white radiance that seemed to penetrate everything. 2 minutes remaining. A new sound began. Something like singing, but at frequencies that made my bones vibrate. The melody was achingly beautiful and filled with such sadness that tears began streaming down my face without my conscious awareness. 1 minute remaining. The singing reached a crescendo and then abruptly stopped. The light faded rapidly. When the timer reached exactly 7 minutes, I turned off the apparatus and looked up at the platform. The chains lay empty on the white marble. The defendant had been completely dissolved. Father Domenico approached with a silver cup containing dark red wine. "Drink this immediately," he instructed. I consumed the entire cup without question. The wine was warm and had a metallic aftertaste that lingered in my mouth for hours afterward. "How do you feel?" Father Domenico asked. "Shaken, but intact. The defendant knew personal information about my family. How is that possible?" Spiritual beings have access to information that exists beyond normal human perception. They use this knowledge to manipulate and distract during the execution process. This is why the rules exist and why you must never deviate from them. Over the following months, I executed 7 more defendants. Each case involved a different type of spiritual being, and each one attempted different methods to disrupt the process. A corrupted demon attempted to create visual illusions that made the apparatus controls appear to be melting and shifting. I maintained focus by feeling the dial positions with my fingers rather than relying on sight. A fallen seraph created auditory hallucinations that made me hear Sophia crying in pain somewhere in the chamber. Following my training, I ignored the sounds and completed the execution within the required time frame. The most disturbing case involved an entity that had been masquerading as a saint to deceive human worshippers. During the execution process, it projected images directly into my peripheral vision, scenes of my family being tortured and killed in graphic detail. I forced myself to focus on the apparatus controls and complete the 7-minute process, but the experience left me nauseated and shaking. After each execution, the blessed wine helped clear my mind and neutralize whatever effects the process had on me. Father Domenico explained that without this spiritual cleansing, executioners eventually began experiencing nightmares, hallucinations, and progressive mental deterioration. The wine contains elements blessed specifically for this purpose, he told me during one of our post-execution debriefings. It was developed by Vatican alchemists in the 16th century after several executioners lost their sanity from spiritual contamination. By my first anniversary in the position, I had become proficient at ignoring whatever distractions the defendants created. The work was emotionally taxing, but I took pride in carrying out the divine court's judgments with precision and consistency. The compensation allowed me to pay for Sophia's heart surgery with the best pediatric cardiac team in Italy. My mother received experimental cancer treatment that significantly extended her life. My family's financial security was assured for the first time in years. More importantly, I began to understand the significance of the work I was doing. Father Domenico shared case files that showed the damage these beings had caused before their capture and trial. Corrupted angels who had led human souls into damnation, demons who had impersonated religious figures to spread false teachings, spiritual parasites that fed on human suffering and despair. The executions I carried out prevented these entities from causing further harm to innocent people. The work served a purpose beyond the substantial salary. During my second year, an incident occurred that tested my adherence to the rules in an unexpected way. The defendant was a former archangel who had attempted to overthrow the divine hierarchy. The case file indicated exceptional power and intelligence, with multiple warnings about sophisticated manipulation abilities. As I began the execution process, the defendant remained completely silent. No attempts to distract me, no manipulation, no pleading. This was highly unusual and made me more nervous than the typical pattern of attempted interference. 3 minutes into the process, the defendant finally spoke. "Marco, you have served faithfully, but you do not understand what you are truly doing here." I kept my focus on the apparatus controls and continued the process. "The beings you have executed are not the monsters they appear to be in those case files. They are refugees from a war you cannot comprehend." 4 minutes remaining. I maintained my concentration on the dials. The divine court is not dispensing justice. It is eliminating witnesses to crimes committed by the highest levels of the celestial hierarchy. 5 minutes remaining. Despite my training, the defendant's words were creating doubt in my mind. "Your daughter's heart condition was not a natural occurrence. It was inflicted to ensure your compliance with this position." 6 minutes remaining. My hands began to shake as I operated the final control sequence. "Look at me, Marco. See the truth of what you are destroying." Every instinct told me to maintain focus on the apparatus, but the defendant's claims about Sophia had shaken me profoundly. Against all my training, I glanced up at the platform. The defendant was not the monstrous entity I had expected. Instead, I saw what appeared to be a beautiful human figure, bound in chains that were burning its flesh. The being's eyes met mine, and in that instant, I experienced a flood of images and sensations that nearly overwhelmed my consciousness. I saw the defendant's perspective on the cases I had been told about. Angels who had tried to protect humans from divine punishment they considered unjust. Spiritual beings who had discovered corruption within the celestial hierarchy and were eliminated before they could expose it. Entities who had refused to participate in what they believed were immoral orders from higher authorities. The images lasted only seconds before I forced myself to look back at the apparatus controls. The 7-minute timer had reached its end, and I completed the execution process. As the defendant dissolved, its final words echoed through the chamber. "Now you know the truth. The choice of what to do with that knowledge is yours." I consumed the blessed wine as required, but this time it could not completely eliminate the visions I had experienced. The images remained vivid in my memory, along with profound doubts about the nature of my work. Father Domenico noticed my distress during the post-execution debriefing. "You looked at the defendant, didn't you?" I nodded, unable to lie about what had happened. The previous executioner reported similar experiences before his breakdown. "What did you see?" I described the visions and the defendant's claims about Sophia's condition being artificially induced. Father Domenico was quiet for several minutes before responding. "Marco, the beings we execute are extraordinarily skilled at manipulation. They create false visions and implant convincing memories to turn executioners against their duties. What you experienced was not truth, but a sophisticated form of psychological warfare. How can I know what is real? Trust the divine court's judgment and the case files we provide. These beings are on trial for legitimate crimes against divine law and innocent humans. The visions they create are designed to make you question legitimate authority and abandon your responsibilities." Despite Father Domenico's explanations, I continued to experience doubt about my work. The visions from the Archangel's execution remained vivid and detailed, more like memories than hallucinations. I began researching the defendants I had executed, using Vatican archives to verify the information in their case files. Most of the documentation supported the official version of events, but I found small discrepancies and inconsistencies that troubled me. Several case files referenced evidence that was not present in the archives. Witness testimony came from sources that could not be independently verified. Some defendants had been captured under circumstances that were not fully documented. The more I researched, the more questions arose about the complete accuracy of the charges against these beings. During my third year in the position, I decided to test the defendant's claim about Sophia's heart condition. I took her to an independent medical specialist for a comprehensive cardiac evaluation. The results were disturbing. The specialist found evidence that Sophia's condition had not developed naturally, but showed characteristics consistent with deliberate induction through unknown means. This type of cardiac abnormality typically results from genetic factors or environmental toxins, the specialist explained. However, your daughter's case shows patterns I have never seen before. The damage appears to have been precisely targeted to specific heart structures. When I asked about possible causes, the specialist was baffled. Frankly, Mr. Benedetti, this looks almost like surgical damage, but there are no entry wounds or scar tissue. It's as if someone reached inside her chest and damaged her heart without opening her body. This revelation forced me to reconsider everything I had been told about my work. If the defendants were capable of the sophisticated manipulation Father Domenico described, why had they not prevented their capture in the first place? If they possessed powers that could affect humans at a distance, why had they allowed themselves to be bound and executed? The alternative explanation was far more troubling. The defendants were telling the truth about being innocent of the charges against them, and Sophia's condition had been inflicted to ensure my compliance with a system of unjust executions. I began paying closer attention to the defendants' words during executions, despite the risk of further spiritual contamination. Over the following months, I heard consistent themes in their final statements. Claims about discovering corruption within celestial hierarchy, references to refusing to participate in unjust actions against humans, mentions of trying to protect innocent souls from divine punishment they considered excessive. Each defendant provided specific details about their alleged crimes that contradicted the official case files. They described being captured while investigating inconsistencies in divine commands or attempting to prevent harm to their assigned human charges. None of these alternative versions could be independently verified, but their consistency across multiple cases was difficult to ignore. The crisis of faith that had been building for months came to a head during what would be my final execution. The defendant was described as a guardian spirit who violated sacred neutrality laws by interfering in human political affairs. According to the case file, this interference had resulted in a war that killed thousands of people. As I prepared the apparatus, the defendant spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Marco, I know you have been researching our cases and questioning the truth of what you have been told. I also know about your daughter's artificial heart condition and how it was used to ensure your cooperation." I kept my focus on the apparatus controls, but listened carefully to the words. The war referenced in my case file was prevented, not caused by my actions. I stopped a conflict that would have killed millions by providing critical information to human peacemakers. The thousands of deaths mentioned in my file are fabricated. 2 minutes into the execution process, the defendant continued. "The divine court is not dispensing justice, but eliminating those who have discovered evidence of systematic corruption within the celestial administration. We are executed not for crimes we committed, but for crimes we tried to prevent." 4 minutes remaining. Despite the risk, I found myself believing the defendant's words. "Your daughter was chosen as leverage because of your specific psychological profile and family situation. Her condition can be healed, but only if you stop participating in these unjust executions." 6 minutes remaining. My hands were shaking as I operated the final controls. "The choice is yours, Marco. Complete this execution and continue serving a corrupt system, or release me and begin exposing the truth about what happens in this chamber." With 30 seconds remaining on the timer, I made a decision that changed everything. I shut down the apparatus. The defendant looked at me with what appeared to be profound relief. "Thank you, Marco. You have chosen correctly." I walked to the platform and began removing the blessed chains that bound the defendant. As the restraints fell away, I could see the being's true form, not the monstrous entity described in the case file. but a luminous figure that radiated peace and compassion. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we begin the work of exposing what the divine court has become and restoring justice to this process." Father Domenico burst into the chamber with several armed Vatican guards. "Marco, step away from the defendant immediately. You have been contaminated by its influence." I stood between the freed defendant and the guards. "Father Domenico, I know the truth about what we have been doing here. These beings are innocent of the charges against them. You have been deceived by sophisticated manipulation. The defendant has implanted false memories and distorted your perception of reality." The freed defendant spoke directly to Father Domenico. "The corruption within the divine court will be exposed. The innocent beings who have been executed will be remembered and honored. This system of injustice ends today." Father Domenico signaled to the guards, who raised their weapons. "Marco, final chance to step aside. We will not allow this dangerous entity to escape." I made my choice and remained between the guards and the defendant. What happened next was unlike anything in my experience. The defendant's form became brighter and more radiant, filling the chamber with warm, golden light. The guards' weapons dissolved in their hands, and Father Domenico fell to his knees as if overwhelmed by the being's presence. "The truth will be revealed," the defendant said, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Justice will be restored. Those who participated in these crimes will face legitimate judgment." The defendant vanished in a flash of light that left the entire chamber filled with the scent of flowers and the sound of distant music. Father Domenico looked at me with a mixture of rage and fear. "Marco, you have no idea what you have done. The consequences of this action will extend far beyond anything you can imagine." I was arrested immediately and held in Vatican detention while church authorities decided how to handle my actions. During the 3 days I spent in the holding cell, I experienced visions and dreams that showed me the full scope of what had been happening in the divine court. I saw innocent spiritual beings being captured, falsely accused, and executed to prevent them from exposing corruption within the celestial hierarchy. I witnessed the systematic elimination of entities who had refused to participate in unjust actions against humans or who had discovered evidence of crimes committed by higher-level authorities. Most importantly, I understood that Sophia's heart condition had indeed been artificially induced to ensure my compliance with the execution program. The threat to my family's well-being had been used to manipulate me into participating in what amounted to judicial murder. On the 3rd day, I was released from detention with a formal declaration that I had suffered a psychological breakdown resulting from spiritual contamination and was no longer capable of rational judgment regarding the divine court proceedings. My Vatican employment was terminated, and I was required to sign additional confidentiality agreements under threat of criminal prosecution. The church provided a substantial severance payment and arranged for Sophia to receive complete cardiac treatment that fully healed her condition. Father Domenico explained that the healing was provided as a humanitarian gesture and not as any admission of wrongdoing by the church. In the months following my release, I began experiencing visitations from spiritual beings who thanked me for my role in exposing the divine court's corruption. They provided information about ongoing efforts to reform the celestial justice system and eliminate the abuses I had witnessed. I learned that the defendant I had freed was leading a comprehensive investigation into the divine court's activities and working to exonerate the beings who had been unjustly executed. The evidence of systematic corruption was being presented to higher authorities within the celestial hierarchy. Several other Vatican employees who had been involved in the divine court operations came forward with their own concerns about the legitimacy of the proceedings. Together, we provided testimony that led to significant reforms in how spiritual beings are tried and sentenced. Father Domenico was reassigned to a remote monastery, and the divine court chamber was permanently sealed. The apparatus of final dissolution was destroyed under the supervision of independent investigators from the highest levels of Vatican authority. Most importantly, I learned that the 3 rules I had been required to follow were designed not to protect me from the defendants, but to prevent me from seeing evidence of their innocence and the injustice of their executions. Looking directly at the defendants would have revealed their true nature as innocent beings. The 7-minute time limit prevented extended communication that might expose inconsistencies in the case files. The blessed wine contained substances that suppressed memory and critical thinking to maintain compliance with the program. The rules existed to ensure that executioners remained ignorant of the crimes they were committing. Today, Sophia's heart is completely healthy, and my family has recovered from the trauma of our experience with the Vatican's corrupt justice system. I work as a security consultant for organizations that investigate institutional abuse and corruption. The spiritual beings who were unjustly executed have been officially exonerated, and their families have received formal apologies from the highest levels of celestial authority. The divine court has been reformed with independent oversight and transparent procedures that prevent the abuses I witnessed. My name is Marco Benedetti, and I was an executioner for the Vatican's divine court. I learned that sometimes the most important rules to break are the ones designed to keep you from seeing the truth. The work I do now focuses on exposing institutional corruption and protecting innocent people from systems of injustice. It is more meaningful than any position I have ever held, and it allows me to use my experience to prevent similar abuses from occurring elsewhere. The truth has power, but only when people are willing to see it and act upon it, even when that means breaking the rules they have been told to follow without question.